Welcome back to SAMMcast, the podcast by the Students' Association of Management and Marketing at the University of Melbourne. We aim to be the go-to space for all things considered in the world of management and marketing and how it links to you, your uni life, and future career. Our co-hosts today are myself, Gabrielle, and Helen. In this episode, we'll be breaking down the marketing major. It might look a bit confusing at first, but today we'll delve into it and make sure it's easy for you to understand. So firstly, we'll be looking at how the major will be structured. Then, we'll go through some of the core subjects you'll be taking, like Principles of Marketing and Business Judgment. Finally, we'll give you a taste of some of the cool Level 3s you might choose to take later on down the track. Joining us today are a few members of the academic staff here at the University of Melbourne to give you some insight into how your marketing major might look. So we thought it would be great to start off by having Andre come in to talk to us about what exactly has changed and how it will affect you. So Andre, could you please introduce yourself?
My name's Andre Sammartino. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Management and Marketing, and I'm the deputy head of responsible for teaching and learning. So yeah, I have to guide these things through our processes.
Andre, could I ask you to maybe describe how exactly the marketing major is structured at the University of Melbourne?
Not a problem. So the marketing major is designed very much as an inverted pyramid. Most students do principles of marketing in first year, and that is a prerequisite to a number of the other subjects. The idea there, again, is very much around what are the underlying basic concepts and contexts for marketing. So, what is the marketing problem? What are some of the tools that marketers use? What are some of the decisions they have to make? So that's very much first year. In second year, it's then about building upon those foundational concepts. And so across the various second year subjects, you get exposed to consumer behavior, for example. So delving deeply into what do we mean by a consumer? What do we know at a psychological level about the nature of consumption and so forth? Likewise, in other subjects, what does it mean to innovate a product? What is the design process, et cetera, and then by third year, we get to the specialization space. So at that point, you can start to say, well, I'm really interested in advertising and promotion, so I want to do a subject in that space. I'm very interested in digital marketing, so I want to go down that space. I'm interested in entrepreneurship, I want to look at what to do in that space. So again, and by third year, to achieve the major, you have to do 3 third-year subjects, including our capstone subject, which is business judgment.
Fabulous, thank you. So I guess now we'll have Andre maybe talk to us a bit about what this capstone subject is that we keep talking about, business judgment. This is a compulsory subject for all students undertaking either the marketing or management major. So maybe you could give us like a bit of an overview of what exactly you're learning and like subject content.
So a capstone subject, just to get a sense of what I mean by a capstone subject, this is a terminology that gets used educationally, and most programs in the university have a capstone. And when you get into our master's programs, for example, there's a requirement that there be one. They can do the various things, but in this instance, business judgment is what we call an integrative capstone. So the idea is that it's an opportunity for students to synthesize tools and concepts from across their study. In this instance, from across the majors and the BCom more generally. So we're aware that students will have done the past 2 years of the BCom as well. So we're aware of what tools come from those domains. And in business judgment, it's very much about focusing students' attention on solving problems, not in the sense of problems that have a known solution, but rather making judgments about key issues. So whether those issues are a marketing choice, so what product should we launch, or what price should we engage in, or where should we place this product, or how should we change a product, or a management decision about opening up new markets, or changing a work structure, changing an organizational structure. So any one of those sorts of decisions. So the subject is very much thinking about what tools do you need, and what tools do you already have? Because there's a danger in both of our majors. You're building up this arsenal, but you're not really sure what they're all for. So it's saying, well, why have we got all these tools? What do we use a 5 forces framework for? What's it really there for? So the subject reminds students of the tools, because students won't have done every subject. So we remind students of lots of the tools, and we do introduce some decision-making scaffolding. So thinking about decision steps and thinking about how do you critically assess what you're doing as you go. And the aim really, in terms of what we aim to deliver alongside the sort of 2 consulting subjects that we also run from our department, is that these are real dress rehearsals for making decisions out there in the real world.
A lot of people talk about like the sort of business simulation. I guess, is this something you should be holding off on taking until like your last semester? Like, do you need to be quite prepared for this?
Great question. Yes, please do it in your last semester. Look, it's I won't get into the complexity of how the university enrollment systems work and how hard it is to put point requirements on subjects. But yes, anyone who enrolls in the subject will find they get frequent emails from me before semester starts saying, please do this in your final semester. Look, our experience already, having run it for a couple of years, is students perform much better in their final semester because obviously they come best armed to tackle any of the problems and you get the sort of most out of it. Now, your question was, what's the simulation? I can tell you about this. So we use a simulation, and it's not quite half the assessment, but it's sort of half of the work, if you will, for the subject, which is a business strategy simulation. So you and a team are trying to build competitive advantages over rival teams through your product design, through your marketing efforts, through your production scheduling, your pricing, your financing, etc. And very much captures the integrative aspect of the decisions you will be making in the real world, because they're very interrelated decisions and there are big trade-offs involved in making one decision versus another. And there's high levels of uncertainty created by the competitive environment. So you're competing against 5 other firms. You start out identical and you evolve away from each other because of your decisions. We run 6 years of competition. So each set of decisions is a year. And so students get a strong sense of the competitive dynamics and the learning process and the flow-on effects from decisions and how decision-making changes over time as you make the same decisions again and again. And that in itself is an important thing to understand, that there's both huge learning gains, but also some bias issues that emerge as you try and make the same decision again and again.
Yeah, truly.
Students complain that it's a lot of work,
Yeah.
but students usually throw themselves into it and learn a great deal from it.
Yeah, no, a lot of my friends were saying it was probably the most enjoyable part of the subject, just getting like that real world exposure, I guess. So it's great to hear from you, the sort of skills that you're gaining from it. Did I miss any important aspects of business judgment that I maybe didn't cover with my questions?
Probably, I guess, the other side of it. So I wouldn't want students to think we just do the simulation. So we do the simulation first. In the second half of the semester, we sort of flip that around quite a lot, and the same teams then get involved in thinking about real life decisions, real life solutions for firms. So we've done it different ways from semester to semester, and I must admit we haven't yet decided what we're doing for 2021. We take it, well, I can tell you we do it fairly last minute, to the extent that both in semester 1, 2020, the students did it on COVID. Not surprising. How are various industries going to deal with this? We thought maybe the second semester we wouldn't be doing COVID, but I guess we did again. So hopefully we'll do something a little bit less pandemic related, but that's very much designed around much more creativity, much more of a choose your own adventure scenario where teams can really go off and explore. And we allow students to be much more specialized as well. So if a team is really keen on doing a marketing solution, then we're really happy to see that. If they're really interested in doing a supply chain solution, they can go and do that, or a human resource management. So yeah, that's the other side of it.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't even thought of. That's a good point.
Excellent. Great.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Andre. We really appreciate you coming on the podcast, taking your time of the day to do that. The insights were fantastic, so thank you so much. I'm looking forward to my experiences with business judgment in the future. So next we have Robin joining us today to talk to us a little bit about principles of marketing. So Robin, could you introduce yourself?
Hi Gabriel, Robin Caniford here from the Department of Marketing, and I, along with a couple of other colleagues, share the principles of marketing subject.
Yeah, fabulous. I suppose could you maybe start by giving us like a bit of an overview of subject content and what exactly you're learning?
Sure. Well, principles of marketing is one of those foundational disciplines that I would say this, but I think everybody who does a business degree should know what marketing is. Often we take for granted what even a market is. There's many ways of understanding markets. That depends on the discipline you're taking, whether you're looking at an economic point of view or a sociological point of view. Principles of marketing kind of will help you to cover multiple bases. What is a market? How do we build markets? Are markets out there already waiting for us to come along with good products and to bring those products and serve people's so-called needs, or as marketers, do we go out there and build new needs, make new connections, establish networks between different stakeholders in order to sell products that otherwise people just wouldn't want?
Yeah.
So all kinds of interesting things on how to build markets. What do we need? Do marketers sell things that people don't need? Like all of that kind of interesting stuff is what we'll cover.
Yeah, you get to watch a lot of ads too from memory, so it's a lot of fun in that sense.
Well, the more YouTube videos I show, the less you have to listen to me.
I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Obviously, Principles of Marketing is a prerequisite for a lot of future marketing electives. How do the skills that you learn in Principles sort of help you out with later marketing subjects that you take?
Well, look, I think Principles, in addition to hopefully raising some of these, if you like, more sort of philosophical questions around what is a market and what do marketers do, on a very serious note, Principles will allow you to engage with key concepts that it's going to make life much easier when you're doing a subject, let's say like consumer behavior. If you took consumer behavior, if you don't know what market segmentation and targeting is, you're going to be behind the curve vis-a-vis the rest of the students. So very important to understand some of these key foundational concepts and ideas in marketing theory. And in addition to being useful to get you over the hurdle in terms of prerequisites, like I don't think you can do many subjects without having taken Principles. But even in the workplace, these ideas like market segmentation, targeting, positioning, brand value, brand personality. This is the lingua franca, the regular ideas that if you're working, whether you're working with KPMG or if you're going into a startup, this is the work that they do.
Yeah, so it's very much like that real world experience that you're getting there.
I hope so. I mean, Melbourne University comes in for a bit of a hard time with, why is there so much theory? And I always say to students, if you take the subject, you'll hear this again, but theory is really important because theory teaches you how to make up new ways of doing marketing. We're not just teaching best practice now, because when you get your degree and go into the workplace, that's going to be out of date. So we're teaching you how to come up with creative ideas for how to do marketing in interesting ways that consumers might find appealing, and maybe even that can extend more ethical and value-based principles in the marketplace.
Yeah, so I guess theory is one of those important things, but what would you say are like the real highlights of the subject for students? I know that you work on cases, you get to watch a lot of ads. Are there things that students tend to enjoy more than others?
Highlights. It's been a long time since I did my degree, and I did a psychology degree anyway. So I'm not sure I could say. You'd probably be able to tell me what were the highlights for you. I mean, you were closer to them.
I think I kind of enjoyed working with an actual sort of brief for the first time. Like when I was taking the subject, it was Harley Davidson motorcycles, and that was the first time I'd actually tried marketing a real product. So I really enjoyed going through that and working on branding and whatnot. So I think for me, that was probably the most important experience that I got, and also the most interesting experience that I got. I think the year before me, it was Nutella, and they seemed to love that. So I think just speaking to my friends, that was probably the most fun.
I'm really glad you enjoyed that. So, okay, that makes good sense to me. I will note that.
Yeah, no, it's great, especially because later on you do like all the other marketing electives. Like I just did advertising and promotions, and they just add even more like layers to it. So I think Principles is a great start for getting used to working on actual cases and stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's what is intended. And as you say, as you go through your university career, layers get added. But what I would say, having taken students to Hong Kong for the global consulting projects, and where you get to sit with a team of real marketers doing, real world projects, they are still using some of these tools and techniques that we will teach you to apply very early on. It's an interesting and a relevant subject, I hope.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's funny you mentioned that. I'm actually doing global management consulting at the moment. So it's like we are using a lot of those segmentation and like those basic like buyer value proposition tools that you learn in Principles. So definitely important information.
Great.
Finally, we'd be curious, like if you're someone who isn't interested in doing the marketing major, would you still recommend taking this subject as like a breadth or elective?
Well, there's two answers to that. The first one is yes. For me, marketing is about building networks between different stakeholders. They might be other businesses, they might be consumers, they might be groups of consumers. And the techniques of building those networks involve understanding what people want, what motivates people, how people trust you enough to establish those links. Now, that is a fundamental necessity for almost all businesses, unless you're operating in some kind of weird monopoly, like selling maybe COVID vaccines, or even not a monopoly, but it's a different kind of market. For most of us, we need to know these techniques, whether you're an accountant, whether you're a chief financial officer, whether you're a CEO. If you don't know something about marketing, you're not putting yourself in the best position for your career. And a basic knowledge of marketing is useful under those terms. My second answer would be, if you're not that interested, go and study history or some useful breadth, something to really challenge yourself and step outside of your comfort zone. That would be if I had my university time again, that's what I'd do.
Well, thank you so much, Robin. We really appreciate you coming on.
It's my pleasure, Gabrielle. Take it easy.
Fabulous. So, in this next segment, we'll be looking at a few interesting marketing level 3 subjects that you can take to complete your marketing major. So, joining us first is Mikal, who will be discussing retailing. So, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Gabrielle. My name is Mikal Carrington, and I'm a senior lecturer here in the Department of Management and Marketing, and I teach retail. And I guess my background is actually a corporate background. So I worked for Unilever for about 10 years. And when I worked for Unilever, I worked across the negotiation desk from a lot of the really big retailers. So here in Australia, so Coles and Woolies, but also in the UK, and worked with retailers like Tesco's and Sainsbury's and Boots. So have always worked, I guess, around retail. And so it's just fantastic to be able to now teach retail.
Yeah, glad you're taking the subject. That's an amazing background. Students would probably be interested in getting sort of a general overview of what exactly you're learning in retail.
The thing about retail, I guess, that's different from a lot of the other courses that you'll do, whether it be in management, marketing, or any other area, is that retail is the interface with the customer. It's the interaction point between your organization, the product, and the customer themselves coming into your store, or maybe shopping online or shopping in mobile digital world, whatever it might be. And so it's really, I guess, different and exciting because it is about that whole face, that interface with the customer, and how we work with customers to ensure that we're meeting but also exceeding their expectations. And one of the really great things about working in retail is the complexity. So when you work in a retail business, you're working with so many different, I guess, angles and elements of complexity. You're considering packaging and price, but you're also considering how customers are moving around the store or how they're moving around your website. You're thinking about all different factors, and it's such a complex environment where everything comes together and the customer picks up the product and puts it in their shopping basket. And so that in itself and that whole level of complexity makes the subject and makes working in retail, I guess, a really, really exciting place to be. And so we try and bring a lot of that, I guess, excitement and complexity into the subject. And the other thing, I guess, that makes retail really different and really interesting is because it is that point of contact with the customer. It means that there is a lot of innovation going on in the retail space. And so probably more than anywhere else. So whether we're talking about how do we maximize the customer journey, how do we maximize customer experience, right through to working with artificial intelligence systems to try and, I guess, manipulate what we do to ensure that we are targeting the right customer in the right way. So there's a lot of innovation that is going on in the retail space, which again, we bring into the course, and it just makes it so interesting.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. Do you think that's what attracts students towards your subject, or what would you consider the most enjoyable parts to be?
I think it's twofold. I think firstly, it is that there is so much innovation going on in the retail space, and there's so much happening, and there's so many new things, and it's moving really, really quickly. And I think the other thing that really attracts students to retail is that we are all shoppers. So we shop, it's part of our culture, it's what we do. We shop, we customers, we go into online stores, we go into physical stores. And so as a retail student, you can relate to what you're being taught because you are a shopper, you are a customer. A lot of students have actually worked in retail. So, but what the course does is it kind of pulls back the veil and you get to see behind the scenes and see how that shopping environment is curated and nothing happens by chance. And so you get to really look inside a retailer, understand their strategy, and understand why retailers do what they do. And I guarantee you, once you've done retail, you will never shop the same. You will never be able to go into a retailer online or in a physical store in the same way because you'll be switched on and you're constantly aware of what retailers are doing to try and meet your expectations, but also in a way manipulate your behavior.
Oh, that's really interesting. Even like a lot of my friends who've taken this subject, they talk a lot about the ethical side of things. I understand that's sort of an important issue that's discussed in retailing. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about that side of things?
Yeah, the ethics of retail are becoming even more important and pronounced with the impact of artificial intelligence systems into retail as well. And so when we're talking about retail, we have to be really careful about how we target vulnerable people and vulnerable customers. And so on one side of retail, when we think about I guess, the ethicality of retail, we do spend a bit of time thinking about how customers can be vulnerable and the power that we have as retailers to manipulate customer behavior. And so I think one of the unveilings that students have when they come and take retail, as I mentioned before, we pull back the veil and they get to see what retailers actually do and the strategy behind it. And some of what retailers do might surprise you in terms of the types of data they're collecting on you and you as an individual and how they're profiling you and how they're targeting you specifically using your data and predictive analytics to really, I guess, target and manipulate your behavior. And so I think part of the unveiling and the thing that students find really interesting is understanding what retailers are doing and why they're doing it on that individual level. But the other area of ethics and retail is probably, I guess, the more bigger picture side of it, which is more around social and environmental sustainability. So when you think about fast fashion retailers, for example, like H&M, Topshop, Primark, all of those big global retailers, they've got massive global footprints when it comes to supply chain, when it comes to waste in supply chain, how they treat their workers. And they're really, really impactful in that area. There are some very concerning things that go on in retail supply chains, and we talk about those and we look at those in terms of waste and environmental sustainability. And we also talk about and look at the human side of retail supply chains and the people that, for example, make the clothes in that sweatshop factory and what happens there. So we really look at ethics, as I said, from a micro perspective and understanding how retailers use data to target individual customers and what happens when that customer could be quite vulnerable. And we also then look at the macro side of ethics, looking at environmental and social footprints of retailers. And some of those retailers, I mean, the retail industry has become so condensed. There are fewer, bigger retailers now. So if you went back 25 years or 30 years ago, there were a lot more retailers out there and they were smaller, but now they're really big and big global players like, obviously Amazon is an easy example, but Walmart and other players as well. And they're such big players that they have such massive global impacts for good, but also sometimes not for good. And we need to look and consider those as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a key issue. We actually have a podcast coming up about fast-moving consumer goods and the impact they have in terms of sustainability. So it's great to hear that from you as well.
Yeah, and so we do. One of the things we look at is the fast fashion model. Again, there are positives and negatives coming out of the fast fashion model. So for those retailers that do fast fashion and they do it really well from a supply chain perspective, actually what they often do is they almost eliminate waste from their supply chain. So because they're not producing clothes that people aren't going to buy, and they're not producing fabric and that is not going to be used and it's going to be, they're very lean in the way they do things. And so fast fashion retailers actually can have, not all of them obviously, but can have a really positive impact in terms of environment waste, environmental waste. But then you look at the human side of fast fashion manufacture, and some retailers have a really great record and other retailers don't.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have even thought about that other side of things, like the waste elimination. How interesting. I guess, finally, what sort of projects do students get to work on while they're taking retailing?
We do 2 projects, one which is an individual project and one which tends to be a group project. They're always real world situations. So it might be, for example, one of the topics that we look at pretty early on in the semester is omni-channel retailing, and understanding that retailers are very much now moving towards an omni-channel model, which means that you might have big stores, small stores, pop-up stores, but you've also got mobile digital, you've got online, you've got all of these different channels that the customer can come and experience your product or your service in. Perhaps we might do an assignment where students look at a real retailer and go out and have a look at their omni-channel footprint and how well are they doing in the omni-channel space, and have they moved into omni-channel retail, and if not, why not? So that would be one kind of assignment that you might do. And then the major assignment is generally always on a specific retailer that you might choose yourself, or it might be a specific retailer that everyone's working on. It is a real life situation, and generally it's quite strategic, and so you'll be looking maybe at their competitive strategy. So you might look at Amazon to try and understand how they're competing in the marketplace, and then make a recommendation about how they might launch in the Australian market.
Yeah, wow. It sounds like you get so much practical knowledge out of this subject, which I think what students are always looking for. I think that's why so many people were asking us to get retailing on the podcast.
Oh, great.
Because, it is such an interesting new area. But yes, thank you so much for coming on this episode and telling us a bit more about retailing. It sounds like an amazing subject. So thank you so much for the insights.
Oh, thank you so much, Gabrielle. And I really do hope to see some of see you guys in my class. It would just be a delight. So thank you.
Terrific. So next on the podcast, we have Danielle, who's here to talk to us a bit about advertising and promotions. So Danielle, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Hi, so my name's Danielle Kimilevsky-Raimonda. I am from the Department of Management and Marketing. I'm a lecturer in marketing. I'm also a co-director of the Master of Marketing Communications program that we run concurrently with the Faculty of Arts, and I do teach a 3rd year subject called Advertising and Promotions.
Yeah, that's really great. Just for students who haven't heard of advertising and promotions before, could you maybe give us an overview of the subject and what you learn?
Sure. Advertising and promotions is, I guess, part of the stream associated with marketing. Okay, so if you want to major in marketing, this is one of the subjects that you would do towards the end, because it's a 3rd year level subject. So you'd start off with principles of marketing, which kind of gives you a grounding. There's something called the 4 principles of marketing, and one of those 4 principles is, of course, promotions, which is advertising and promotions. So advertising and promotions looks very much at the new, more strategic way of looking at communications and promotion and advertising, which is from a very integrated perspective. So it's not just looking at traditional advertising like we would think of it in terms of television advertising, but it's looking at newer forms through social, digital, interactive media. We also cover things like public relations, sales promotions, and we kind of examine all of these different ways in which companies can engage in promotions, and why and when you would use a combination of these, and what are some of the foundational theories, and how brands and marketers, especially in the 21st century, which is incredibly competitive. It's a very, very cluttered environment. It's also an incredibly fragmented environment. Consumers becoming more and more kind of niche with subgroups, subsegments. How marketers can use different communications and promotional tools and use them in a kind of cohesive, integrated manner to communicate their platforms, develop a positioning and a brand image, but also be able to connect and resonate with different segments that they might be targeting. Some of them might be a bit similar, some of them might be quite different, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a consistent but also sort of unique, specialized communication platform with each of them. It's one subject. It's the only advertising and promotion subject that's offered as part of the Bachelor of Commerce. So we cover a lot of topics in a little bit of detail because it's kind of like the foundations to advertising and promotion. You don't learn how to create an ad. It's not that sort of creative side, but you learn the sort of key theories, the underpinning. It's quite a creative subject, but there is also theory in it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of students talk about the live brief as sort of one of the more exciting parts of the subject, and I guess getting to work with a real marketing agency. How important are those skills that you learn from working on briefs and designing campaigns?
I think they're really important. Actually, that's a good point. I didn't mention that in answering your previous question, that one of the things I've been doing probably for the last, I think, 5 years with this subject is I've been really fortunate that I've been able to develop some relationships with industry partners. So we've worked with publicists, and the last, I think, 3 years has been with Saatchi and Saatchi. And they've given us what are called live briefs. So these are briefs that they are actually working on at this present time. They're obviously being paid, a lot of money by their clients, but they give a kind of condensed version of that very same brief for students in advertising and promotions to undertake as a group assignment. And of course, whilst you're not going to be paid as much money for anything like that, it gives you great experience because, first of all, for many students, just having something to put on their CV, that they have some experience, that they've had an opportunity to sort of get their hands dirty, that's important because not everyone has the opportunity to get that experience. But I think, for me, it allows you to kind of get a feel for what you would be doing if you were out in industry, working in an advertising agency. It gives you the opportunity to sort of understand, context and the importance of research. And, we talk about all of these things like segmentation in class, and sometimes they just seem like concepts or theoretical things. But having someone from industry come in and, Alex Speakman, who's the contact in Saatchi and Saatchi, he comes in, he does a live brief, then he does a live Q&A session where you can talk to him and ask him questions. I think it's also illuminating for a lot of students to recognise that, what we cover in class is not just fluffy stuff. They actually do use that. He uses the Helix personas. He looks at segmentation. He does the research. He understands the importance of strategy. And so I think it's an opportunity for students to get their hands kind of dirty, so to speak, by really trying to solve a real problem that a big advertising agency is doing at the same time. And yeah, it gives you the opportunity to sort of get some exposure and understanding of how research works and how that sort of forms the basis for the strategy that you come up with. It definitely allows you to work with the group, which I know can have its challenges, but once you start working in industry, you'll also be working in teams. So I guess there is that aspect to it. And I think it also, even though it is a lot of work, it gives you the opportunity perhaps to be a bit more creative than if you were to just do a standard kind of university assignment. So I think most students appreciate that, and you do have the opportunity to make a contact with industry. I know last year was, of course, done via Zoom, so it wasn't the same as being in the classroom, but you can connect with that person, and you've got a kind of an you've got a bit of a relationship that you can build on, and that's really important just to sort of get your foot in the door.
No, I completely agree with that. I mean, it was definitely my favorite part of taking advertising and promotions. I guess for students who aren't maybe interested in going into the whole advertising agency field, do you think it's still a subject that is important to take?
Look, I think if you're doing marketing, you don't have to go into an advertising agency to understand and appreciate the importance of advertising and promotion. I think whether you go into, like, even if you go into market research or even into management consulting or strategy consulting, a lot of For example, what Alex does in his role in Saatchi, because his role is strategy. It's actually what a lot of management consulting is. It's that kind of research and sort of understanding the market, understanding the competitors, understanding the product, the offering, the unique aspect to it. And so you don't have to work in advertising and promotions to undertake this subject. In fact, a lot of students don't. Some don't even want to go into marketing. They're just doing it because whether you like advertising or not, it is pervasive. It sort of infiltrates every aspect of our life. And I think it doesn't matter how sophisticated we like to think we are, we're affected by it in some way, shape or form. So it's really interesting also from a kind of pop culture perspective. But, you know, a lot of students who do the subject are more interested perhaps in going into consulting or maybe branding or marketing in general, possibly market research. But, you know, advertising and promotions, it's an important component of any form of marketing, whether you're going to have a big, massive $20 million campaign or a really small niche social media driven campaign. You're still relying on promotions, you're still relying on communications, you're relying on, you know, perhaps influencers, blogs, social media. That's all communications, that's all advertising and promotions. So no, you don't have to want to be an advertising executive to get something out of the subject.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm actually doing management consulting like as a subject at the moment. And the skills are so transferable. Like we've used all the resources like IBIS World and stuff to conduct market analysis. So
yeah.
I was really happy to have learned that.
Yeah, well, that's great. And in fact, if you've sort of done a bit of research about the industry, you'll see that a lot of the accounting firms and sort of consulting firms like KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, they've actually moved into advertising in a huge way, of course, because that represents a whole new market for them. But there are also synergies because they were already doing consulting. I know my brother was doing management consulting, and a lot of what he was doing was, you know, sure, high level strategy, but it was still fundamentally market research. You know, it was really trying to understand the company, the specific brand or category that they were being paid a lot of money to understand, who were the competitors, what was your niche, what was your point of differentiation. So, you know, a lot of people do marketing without realizing that that's what they're doing, because marketing isn't just advertising, it isn't just segmentation, it is actually quite strategic. You know, a lot of fundamental decisions that any company makes, whether it's to enter a new market, to increase or decrease a price, add a new product or a sub brand or a new updated version of the product, target new customers, do something against competitors. It's all understanding what your point of difference is versus your competitors. What are the similarities? What can you exploit? Weaknesses, opportunities, you know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And that very much comes down to different aspects of marketing, and advertising and promotion plays a role. And I think that's why each year we also get a number of students who are kind of breadth students, or students who are maybe doing accounting or finance and they just want to balance out, because, yeah, you don't have to want to go into advertising to see that there is a synergy or some use or complementarity.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, Danielle. Thank you so much, Danielle. We really appreciate all of your insights into the subject.
No problem. Thank you so much, Gabrielle.
It's fabulous to have you on. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of SAMMcast. Stay tuned for future episodes where we delve into other interesting topics in the world of marketing and management. And thank you again to our guests for being here.